Hello, this is Dr. John Spink, Director of the Food Fraud Initiative at Michigan State University. This is Part 3, Evolution of the Research, for my presentation, Food Fraud and Crimes, at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, October 11th. Please see the previous two parts for the full video. So Food Fraud Initiative actions. So this is what we do and how we do it and how we kind of got where we are. First off, we try to identify anybody and everybody that's dealing with food fraud prevention, trying to connect with them and see if there's some way we can work together. First off, early on, in about 2015, I'm the director and the founder of the Food Fraud Think Tank here at Michigan State. These are industry brand owner members who fund us essentially to just keep working on harmonization of terms and sharing of best practices regarding prevention and strategy. I'm a visiting scholar with Queen's University Belfast. This started with a long connection with Chris Elliott there at Queen's, his early work on food crimes and food fraud. And we had a research project that started in 2013 and have stayed involved with them. Foreign subject matter expert for the Chinese National Center for Food Safety Risk Assessment. That was 2015 to 2016. Still have a great close relationship there with Director Dr. Yongning Wu especially, and Dr. Junsi Chen, among others. Really had a fabulous experience spending a lot of time over there, including a full month there in the middle of the year, and really learned a lot about a lot of aspects of the challenges and activities there in China. So it's been really important as a base understanding there. Advisory board passed of the Food Integrity Project for the European Commission. So this is it's actually ending this year. The overall 13 million euros spent, really looking at food authenticity testing and programs there to understand what was going on. Fascinating to be a part of that and really glad to be a part of the board. Previous member of the Food Fraud Think Tank for GFSI. So this was one of the most influential food fraud activities in the world, really, because GFSI stepped back to look at what was happening. What was food fraud, how could it be prevented, and what or if was GFSI's role. So it was really fabulous to be involved with that at the start. There are 4 of us at the start and 6 total that then worked on this through the course of a year and then presented to the GFSI board a report that ended up being used in the GFSI position paper on food fraud. And that really led to all the food fraud GFSI requirements that are now in place. Former member of the GMA, Grocery Manufacturers Association Economic Adulteration Work Group. So this is back in part 2. It talked about the different terminology in economic adulteration, and that was the beginning of the work there with GMA. Really fascinating to work with GMA, really within the scope of what was going on there with their members and getting to know a lot of the industry folks working on that. Member of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia Food Ingredient Intentional Adulteration Expert Panel, also on povidones adulteration and dietary supplement adulteration. So activity in a lot of different areas. A key with the Food Ingredient Intentional Adulteration Expert Panel, or food fraud, was at the beginning of looking at test methods and protocols for testing, and that really ended with the publishing of the Food Fraud Mitigation Guide for food ingredients, adulterant substances, and then the creation of the USP database. Now, actually, interesting that early on, the USP expert panel gathered information about incidents in scholarly articles because really the expert panel needed information on what test methods were being used. And so a scholarly article would be very clear about the methods, and that was the original scope. That database kept growing and growing and ended up being used as a reference for the types of food fraud. So that's very different from the original goal of the database and then the actual application. So interesting there, working with USP. Chair of the U.S. delegation for Technical Committee 247 for the International Standards Organization. This was the founding chair, I'll say. Product fraud countermeasures. This was early on in 2009. That ended up being rolled into another technical committee. Some very important early ISO standards which defined terms, talked about interoperability, a lot of things that are going on with enhanced traceability for the food industry, especially looking at authentication or anti-counterfeiting type work. Definitely there are ISO standards already in place, whether people know it or not. Observer for Technical Committee 23, Work Group 17, which is actually ISO 22000. So that's just not officially a voting member, but involved with that. And now ISO 22000 does have food fraud and food defense identified in a note there that's within scope, so things that have a health hazard. So the same concepts as FSMA there with ISO 22000, where you have to conduct a hazard analysis to define what is and what is not a health hazard. So it's definitely in ISO now. Member of the U.S. Codex delegation to the CC-FIX group, specifically food fraud. So attended the Mexico City conference there, where this was really brought forward as a topic, food fraud. There's an electronic working group, and then serve under that, either through the U.S. delegation providing comments, and then also comments in through the food fraud working group there. Partner with InfoSan. This is the WHO FAO Food Safety Information Sharing Network. Got invited to a conference in 2016 in Singapore to present on food fraud, and then from there we really realized there were a lot of questions, such as what did the member states need and want? So we have a survey that we conducted that's in the final stages of approval, which hopefully will be good for direction setting for InfoSan. Presenter at Interpol Operation Opsin. Now, not being a member of a country delegation, I can't be a true part of that, but have worked with the Interpol operation folks or the countries that are involved over time, and actually presented at the last Opsin session this last year. And a partner with GMA, again, on their survey on food fraud terminology. This kind of builds on a lot of different things that are going on, but really looking back at the membership and the base of GMA, of what they're looking at for the scope and terms. Member of AOAC, of Presidential Task Force on Food Adulteration. So this is a organization that creates validated test methods. Being involved there to really scope that out for the organization of what's their role, and then what will be their guidance for their members. And finally, ILC, which is very similar to AOAC, looking at overall guidance in the area of food quality, food safety testing, looking at adulteration through their work group of recommendations for their membership. So a key here is a lot of different types of activities, whether it's WHO, Interpol, associations, other universities, just got a lot of activity, and really I gain a lot from understanding what's going on, and hopefully be able to contribute some of the shared insight from all these other activities. So I'll say this next piece is that's what we've been doing, and I'll say the next piece is evolution of the researcher, and that would be myself, Doug Moyer, and others, of what we've along the way, how we've evolved. This is specifically for me. So just to step back, I have a BS MS in packaging from Michigan State Packaging Science, focused on material science, plastics. That's 88 and 91. And then I worked in industry. I worked for Chevron Corporation and then Guyam Corporation. So Chevron is about a $150 billion corporation. Guyam is about $100 million, or was at the time. With Chevron, I started in packaging, plant operations, tech service, marketing, general business management. And the general business management and corporate strategy is really where I had this crossover into having an awareness and understanding of enterprise risk management. So that was starting to look at not only how operations occurred, not only how a headquarters staff group such as packaging has to make decisions, or the constraints they have, but then looking at how corporate management made decisions, what came down from the corporation, how we were judged. And that then included consulting as well. So consulting services there at Chevron, either internally or to other companies, led to an insight of how to really think about these services and then kind of package them essentially. And so Chevron's a Fortune 10 company, and then Guyam is an Inc. 5000 company, so a rapidly growing, fast-growing small company. So it was interesting then to be working there to understand how companies go from, through the process of becoming public, which they did right before I got there, and then as a small company's growing, rapidly growing, could have been 100% growth a year for a while there. Really got a lot of different insight. Food safety. So then I came back kind of into consulting, and one thing I did is I started back teaching in food safety. So before I even moved back, I had a chance to start one of these online graduate classes, packaging for food safety, and then since then I've developed and teach 3 online graduate courses. Now after packaging for food safety, they're related. Now the other courses are related more directly to my work in anti-counterfeiting, product fraud, and risk assessment. Over that time period, 2005 to 2009, I did come back mid-career to get my PhD. That was absolutely crazy as a time there, but it was a thing. It was the right thing for me. This is what I want to do. I love being in this space between academia, industry, governments, associations, and others, having the time to having the opportunity to immerse in that outreach and then go back and think about it and apply it. And so this allows me to be, I guess, kind of simultaneously at the very, very high theoretical level and also at the very, very frontline practical level. And that's why I think a lot of this evolution of me as a researcher has moved forward, because I've really been able to have, with the support of a lot of people at MSU and outside, to really operate all the way there from the core theory into the real practical application. And that was my PhD in anti-counterfeiting and product protection there at the School of Packaging. So far then, it's School of Packaging's Agriculture and Natural Resources. College of Veterinary Medicine is a separate college. And then through my PhD, I ended up teaching anti-counterfeiting, an anti-counterfeiting grad course before graduation. So for those academics out there, to have someone that's getting ready to do their PhD defense, and I've already developed and am teaching a graduate course on the topic, then I had already demonstrated a lot of, I guess, proficiency anyway. And really the research was on intellectual property rights and counterfeiting, and starting to focus on the root cause and looking at that underlying risk assessment. The products actually were more pharmaceuticals and consumer electronics than food at that time, and really definitely counterfeiting and IPR rights. That was the key focus. So when we step back then, as the process evolved, and I came to the School of Criminal Justice, so I was looking at the root cause, and the root cause is criminology. And so this is entering into a third college, the College of Social Science. And so it's very odd as an academic to move around between three colleges, but really I was focusing on and shifting towards where the root cause was. And again, that was criminology. So I had 4 years, great years in the School of Criminal Justice. Really loved working there. A lot of really great people that I have really fond relationships with. And then along the way, there was also this focus on decision making. And that's business and enterprise risk management, and that's COSO, managerial accounting practices. So started to really focus on that area as well. Now, the thing is that when I looked at the application of the topics, it was really a food focus. So I had the opportunity to move out of criminal justice and then move back to the College of Veterinary Medicine and Food Safety to really focus in on the food industry. This has been really critical for me as a researcher, and I think for the topic itself, because it allowed a focus only on one product. So we broadened to all fraud, but we could broaden to all fraud because we were only in one department, only one product. And immersion in interdisciplinary application, and that was really, really key. So interdisciplinary across MSU, maintaining my relationships, and then also this whole academia, industry, government, public-private partnership. So a combination, very, very schizophrenic focus, I guess, as a researcher. So that's the evolution from a very, very specific material science into very interdisciplinary and very much a public-private partnership. Evolution of the food fraud MSU research, the triggers and gravity, I'll say, of how things move forward. So first off, MSU has a focus on food and agriculture, and this is long-time, deep relationships in the topic. So when I have this idea to look at both the very core theoretical research and the very practical application, that's a lot of my colleagues are doing one or the other frequently. A Global Food Safety Initiative and GFSI board members. Early on, this was a very, very critical awakening for me, I guess. Well, opportunity, because as I started to talk about the topic of food fraud and prevention, then I got a lot of interest and support from people that I met through MSU, through the GFSI board, and specific individuals have been really critical to encouraging us along the way. This is not an area that has a lot of funding. It's not an area that's defined, really, but I think taking on our business experience from the past, we saw this as a opportunity to grow in a new space, and we saw that it was a very, very wide open market and a very, very big market that we could make an impact on. So GFSI and specifically their board members were key of creating that trigger and gravity, I guess. College of Veterinary Medicine's leadership vision. Now, the big strategy there was the big opportunity was, and to focus on strategy, not catch bad guys. And that was really a key. So it was 2013 that I had this real opportunity or desire to focus in on food, and the College of Veterinary Medicine brought me back in, and then really it grew from there. Now, in parallel, there was also activity with international standards development. That's ISO, Codex, USP, China, Interpol, and others. So it was interesting as this is growing along, looking at those root causes. I also saw that there needed to be some type of overall structure to guide this, to codify this, to have it be more of a non-governmental organization supported activity or related activity. So in parallel, there was this track that we had in our research of looking at what the needs were in ISO and Codex and others, and then getting involved, and then I guess being a part to see where there was the opportunity and where there was the need. So to have this, our MSU research was able to be a part of that, and that helped to shape all of our research as well. I really have to say MSU Global, they're now called the MSU Hub. They were key at the start, and right early in 2013 when we started the Food Fraud Initiative, they were critical with support of developing the MOOCs. We're now self-supporting, but they started that. They saw the vision. They really forced me to start writing blogs and get this website up. And that's been really critical along the way. I'm very thankful for them for their support and also their big push. Food safety has encouraged us to expand our curriculum over and over. So that went from the food safety class, packaging for food safety, into the anti-counterfeiting class that's still taught since 2008, I guess. And then quantifying food risk, and we're developing more courses as well. Our think tank, so kind of to cycle back to them, this food fraud think tank, the industry people, a lot of them are GFSI related board members. This gift funding has been key through this early stage process. So we had some early funding to get the project started, but then GFSI along the way has really kept it moving forward and kept Michigan State confidence. It's a demonstration of the confidence of industry in this work and the support of it. Oh boy, when we're talking about this kind of research evolution of it, and looking at the history course here on the food and capitalism initiative focus, the growth, as things have been moving forward in the food fraud initiative and our activity, it's been touch and go. There's been probably 10 go no go moments where it was unclear whether this would be able to keep going. Whether this was going to be a field of study that would be supportive over time. So I think it's been real key that a number of Michigan State people especially, but as I said too, GFSI and others, the international standards think tank have been real key to helping us get over those last minute moments and really to keep moving forward. And now really in a solid space of moving forward. Now remember, 10 years ago is when there was that first food fraud EMA public meeting by FDA, and there has not been one since. So there's not been a lot of real focus or activity since then, but that may have been a trigger, and I think so. So there's been a lot of challenges that have continued to go through as we go from the past to the future here through these go or no go moments. There's that whole idea of inspiration and perspiration. Well, I think we had a little different thing here. We had inspiration and desperation, with those 10 go, no go moments. Those were, questions of whether this was going to be funded, whether the position was going to be continued, focusing on food fraud. Maybe other opportunities were there, but it really led to this inspiration and desperation. So there's certainly something there, something to that of being committed and needing to be committed to it to really see it through. Now, when we look at the researcher and the MSU group, really to step back, or kind of in parallel, I guess, we need to look at the evolution of the overall research itself. And we call this the vector approach. So it's how we're starting to look at it, even the philosophy of how we're looking at it. You'll see on the right there that prevention, intervention, and response, that's the Food Protection Plan from FDA from 2007, ancient times. But it's key to look at these concepts as they move. And in the middle, you've got an incident. Something occurs, and then you've got these actions. We talked about that in part 2. So that incident leads to some type of intervention. That's a real action. That's testing. It's detecting. And response is finding product and making sure it's not in the system. And then there has to be this philosophical shift to prevention. That's interdisciplinary, different areas, reducing the vulnerabilities. So incident to intervention is pretty clear, and that's detect, catch, and remove. There's an incident, and you detect. But what's the scope here? The scope is everything, everywhere. This is not only Sudan red, carcinogen colorant. This is not only melamine in infant formula or melamine in pet food. This is not only horse meat and beef. This is any type of fraud. It's any type of protein fraud in any product. It's any type of chemical to deceive a protein test or any type of value add test. It's any type of colorant carcinogen that could be in product or any type of substance or process that would lead product to fraudulently be changed or more attractive. So this is where things really break down when you start to need to protect everything everywhere. So that's really protecting the entire supply chain everywhere, every time, 24/7. These are not diamonds. There's not enough money, and there's not a dense value here. Think about a bag full of diamonds. That's different than a bag full of tomatoes. But that bag full of tomatoes can have just as big of an impact on the food industry or a company than that bag full of diamonds. So it's a really interesting challenge. Now, when we saw this specifically previously with pharmaceuticals, consumer electronics, counterfeiting, and others, we saw things break down because there was incident, detect, there were proposals, and there was no action. How much is enough and how to decide? We saw a lot of times that it was very reactionary. There was no method. And as an ex-sales rep, I want to be able to plan this out. I want to be able to present a case step by step where my client, my customer, will understand that our product is the best product for them and they're motivated to buy. We did not see that when we were looking at this whole incident, detect, react. And again, it's protecting everything everywhere. And really a challenge was how much is enough and how to decide what to do. So we saw that there needed to be a fundamentally different approach. So we kind of went all the way around to the problem from the other end, from the top down. And there were two major breakthroughs for us. The first was the root cause, which is criminology. And I'm so thankful for Dr. Robin Mace from the School of Criminal Justice. She was my first colleague. We were working on food defense together and got talking. And when I was looking at this root cause, she said, this sounds like situational crime prevention. So that's really got us focusing on the space of crime and looking at those vulnerabilities. And a key report for us is this whole idea of crime analysis for problem solvers and 60 easy steps. And that's a previous report from the problem-oriented policing center. And so really the root cause, we need to step back and look at criminology. Criminology is very different than food science. It's very different than microbiology, but there's a real science there to look at the root cause. So before considering the actions and countermeasures, we need to understand the root cause. It's not just detect. Detecting is not the root cause. That melamine in there is not the root cause. The root cause is a weakness or vulnerability to a system that leads someone to decide to put melamine in. So the first breakthrough for us was really looking at this root cause, and that's the field of criminology. The next breakthrough was decision management or accounting and enterprise risk management. So as we started to move forward, we were really talking about what was the decision-making system or criteria. And we really didn't see one. And fortunately, there were two people that were very influential and identified first the whole ERM concepts. One is Tony Phillips, who is a chief risk officer for an insurance company, known Tony for years. And when meeting with him, talking about risk at a high level, he mentioned that this sounded like enterprise risk management. So that was something that was interesting to talk about. Had never heard of that because this was what back at the time in say 2009 or so. This was very emerging as a field for the U.S. as well, for the entire accounting industry. This was not very widely implemented. At the same time, an MSU colleague, Dr. Sherry Perot-Spire, she also was working in this area of enterprise risk management and helped us really look at that and move it forward. So one thing we've got here is now we have this whole idea of what is the root cause, because we're trying to disrupt the bad guy. We're not trying to detect product. We're trying to prevent it from getting in the system anyway. Now, we still need to be able to detect, to look for it, but we need to know what we're looking for, and we need to know why we're looking for it. So that was going at it from understanding the root cause, and then this whole idea of how much is enough is enterprise risk management, where a company does have a mechanism to look at their risk tolerance and really identify situations that are above that risk tolerance. We have a number of articles on ERM if you're interested in that. But a key, the two of those did lead us to this decision for action. That was missing when we went from the incident and detect forward. But now going from this direction, we have a call to action, something that must be done. If there is a situation where the fraud opportunity is above the risk tolerance. That's identified as above. That's a quantitative assessment, and that problem either needs to move within the risk tolerance, below, or it needs to be disclosed. There's an actual action. And at that point, then we can look at these type of reactions and detection, and then we can address the incident. So when we say this vector approach, the vector changed from looking at the incident after it occurred and looking at the kind of detecting it or trying to identify when there's an anomaly, all the way to the other side of it to looking at where there were vulnerabilities in the first place and the root cause of the vulnerabilities. And this makes it so simple. Once people shift to this other focus on the vulnerability, it's really night and day. Also, the amount of resource required to think about this, the intellectual horsepower needed is really much less. Also looking at the science and sciences of food fraud prevention, to step back, there's a lot going on here. And you'll see the main path here is our food safety. Yeah, we're doing authenticity testing, criminology, standards and certification. That gets people on the same page. And this whole enterprise risk management is decision sciences. And so we'll start at the top there. So it's supply chain management, looking at controlling the supply chain, and that's where we understand these risks. And decision sciences is the process of making decisions. That actually feeds in and is a separate concept that supports ERM, enterprise risk management. One step down is standards and certification. That includes a focus on public policy. So you've got these standards and requirements, such as codex, but then you've got public policy or governance or governments looking at interacting with the rest of the world. So that's a real key point. The next level down there is criminology. Now, one part of it is information analysis. And people will talk about intelligence in this area, not realizing that intelligence analysis is a formal science. There's departments of intelligence analysis. This is capital I, capital A intelligence analysis. So there's real processes involved there, a lot of things we can work on and utilize. On the right, you'll notice journalism. That might seem like it's completely out of place here, but journalists in the media are key in this process because there's been situations or articles or stress points from journalists who have done investigative reporting and have actually misunderstood the process. And one example is validated test methods or certification programs for certain types of supplements. Example was there was a statement that actually this came from a government agency or state government attorney general that tested for DNA in herbal supplements. Well, that sounds interesting, and DNA is a really competent process to use, except for when there's no DNA. So in this dietary supplements, there was an enzyme or an extract. There would be no DNA in that. If something came from a leaf, the leaf DNA wouldn't be in there. It would be an extract, some type of oil in there. So one thing we did there is realize we needed to communicate to people that needed information. So we work with our School of Journalism here at Michigan State, co-writing articles that then get found by them. And then finally that builds down. All this background helps us look at food safety, protecting the supply chain, and food authenticity testing. So there's really this overall buildup of the science and sciences of food fraud prevention. Finally, is looking at how everything fits together. And so this is really the business process of the food fraud prevention cycle. And at the core is the fraud opportunity. This is crime science, situational crime prevention. The crime triangle has been studied since the mid-'70s, literally over 10,000 articles, scholarly articles since 2000 with that in the phrase or used in the term. And really we look at understanding why this fraud act occurs. This is the reason. This is why someone would decide that melamine might be something to put in there. And that's why we're focusing on the root cause, both the victim, so people that are getting cheated, the fraudster themselves, and the guardian hurdle gaps. Guardian hurdle gaps are things like industry or governments working together to be guardians to protect it, or hurdle or gaps where we put something in place that makes it hard for the bad guy. And information coming in is review of incidents. Horizon scanning is looking at things that are changing in the marketplace and public policy. Sometimes there's a shift in public policy. Say maybe there's a focus on organic peanuts this year. Well, all of a sudden then that means there's going to be more scrutiny across the entire industry. It's important to know what's happening. That's the information that comes in. So that comes from a wide range of disciplines as well into the criminology fraud opportunity. And then we conduct an initial screen, which is a real quick pass. This is from enterprise risk management. We don't make up these terms. That's from ERM. Always need to check that vulnerability assessment against your own risk tolerance. Two companies may look exactly alike on the outside, but they may have very different reasons for their risk tolerance. Also, the way that they buy product, test, use it, process it, test it, in the marketplace, monitor it in the marketplace, may lead them to have vastly different fraud opportunities and vastly different risk tolerances. Only after doing that assessment can you make some kind of rank. At that point, then we can consider countermeasures, and the cycle continues. So if you then implement a countermeasure to bring something back in control, you do a more detailed assessment, check with enterprise risk management, and you do the risk again. You do the risk rank again. Now we've got a cycle. All the information coming in one place and going out. When we talk about the evolution or this vector of our research, is that when we really looked at how to make decisions, how to start, how much is enough, do I need to act, we had to step back and look at what is the process that will be used in decision making. So that's where this food fraud prevention cycle kept growing and growing to have a place to connect everything to everything. And then along the way, again, it pointed out this need to look at this initial screen to then do the rank. It looked at the need to connect in with enterprise risk management, have a function area where you'd consider countermeasures. Any type of new testing or traceability or other things, now you have a place for that to enter into the system. So adding these all together, the research has evolved in a really specific way, focusing on the application. But then also, as you do see, is that it goes back to some very basic fundamentals, fundamental theories and research at the very core. So looking at the study of history in food fraud prevention, I'll turn this back to challenge my colleagues here, as we've had talk over time, the history of food fraud prevention. So, I look back to say, what's the role of science, the science of history, the study of history, and how to predict the future. And what matters forward. I think that it would be interesting for historians and history researchers to look at what happened or not along the way. Remember, since 200 BCE, why was this not addressed holistically? What happened along the way? A methodical review of the past, that's really a key to understand where it missed each time. What needs to happen, and what's the consequence if nothing does happen again? So here we are with this opportunity to look forward and to make a fundamental change, to really shift to prevention, to be interdisciplinary, to have these requirements. So what needs to happen, not only what's happened to this point, but what needs to continue to happen to really have this be fully implemented? What are similar examples? And I'd like to know lessons learned and applied theory. So help me. Give us the insights on what's happened elsewhere to help guide us on our next steps, to really point out what's most important and moving forward. Recommendation for next. This is your opportunity. So take this history background, the methods of studying history, looking at it into the future, and really help us move forward. Are we good so far? Are we on track? And tell me a story. Tell me the story of how we move forward. Give me direction on where to focus next. Please, I would say, please help me understand and be confident, be motivated to know exactly what we should focus on next. There's a lot of ways to engage with us. Feel free to look at our website. Our MOOCs are definitely an easy way to get started. Again, free courses. I'm really thankful to a lot of people. Michigan State has been very supportive, as well as a number of the other people, State of Michigan, other colleagues. So I say thank you very much to a lot of people that have been really, really supportive. With that, I'll say thank you and take questions.